Messy and masterful. In this podcast, we speak about the success of people who have achieved, built, or done something amazing, special, remarkable, noteworthy, and/or fabulous. Think of presidents, doctors, chefs, architects, filmmakers, writers, philosophers, CEOs, journalists, and the list goes on and on of people who've had a genuine impact on this world. But rather than underlining their career victories, we speak about the challenges they needed to overcome to actually get there. In each episode, we discuss 3 of such challenges, obstacles, difficulties, and/or hurdles with our guest, putting the messy of their lives next to the masterful. A very warm welcome to you. My name is Alder Bab, and I'm so happy you could make it. So sit back, relax, and download the podcast here.
The brains are developing very differently. They're showing what we would consider evolutionary shifts in brain function in the last, say 5 to 10 years, the likes we haven't seen in the last 250,000 years. So what used to take tens and thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of years to change in the brain is happening now in much shorter periods of time, just like the technology curves, right? These things have gone like this, not like that, as most other graphs of anything we ever look at over time.
A very happy Thursday, everyone. I am so very happy you could make it to yet another episode of our podcast program. Previously, we were called the Teach Pitch Podcast, and we now have been renamed to Messy and Masterful, powered by Teach Pitch. So slightly different name, but very much the same content. Every week we speak to people with extremely interesting missions, professions, quests, whatever they have going on. And this week is no exception. We are going to talk for episode 60 to a neurologist, and we're going to discuss the power of the brain with an absolute expert who has extensive knowledge as a chiropractic brain specialist about how our brain adapts, how it grows, how it responds throughout our entire life. I had the honor of having as my guest Dr. Michael Trayford, who has founded Apex Brain Centers, which is a clinic that offers extensive brain rehabilitation programs to people who are suffering from addiction or who have, for instance, suffered a traumatic impact on their brain because of a tragic accident. We speak a lot with Dr. Michael Trayford, among others, about the road to recovery, the agility of our thinking, the era of technology addiction, and how very different our brains evolve one generation to another. This was a mind-blowing conversation with an extremely interesting guest. Now, you can find out more about Dr. Michael Trayford on his website, apexbraincenters.com, or on his Instagram handle, which is @neurowellnessdoc, which you will also be able to find in our show notes. So for now, please enjoy episode 60, interview with Dr. Michael Trayford, the neurologist. Yes, and a very good afternoon for me and morning for our guest, Dr. Michael Trayford. And when I heard about the work of this guest, I needed to read it. I will be honest, Michael, I needed to read it 2 or 3 times to exactly understand what it is you're doing. It's a lot of good work. Let me start with that. There's the element of neuroscience and neurology in there. There is the overcoming trauma and injuries in there. And then there's a lot of chiropractic side to it, which is, so it's an interdisciplinary field. I'm very pleased to have you, and thank you so much for joining us on this podcast. Instead of me doing the intro, can I very quickly ask you, and I hope you don't mind, to very quickly explain what it is that you are doing?
Sure,
Yeah.
absolutely. I appreciate you, Aldo. Thank you for having me on, and I'm glad you, you said you had read through and understand it. I've gotten to the point in my life where I've been at this 25 years, and I'll tell people all the time I feel like I know nothing, simply because the scope has broadened so much. The more you know, the less you feel you know, particularly when it comes
Yeah.
to the brain. So, that said, that lead in, the brain is what we do. It's what I do. It's what I've studied for the past 25 plus years. Board certified chiropractic neurologist is my title. Also have board certification in neurofeedback. So if you know about quantitative EEG and neurofeedback, that's a passion of mine. We have a multidisciplinary practice in Asheville, North Carolina, and looking at some expansion at this point, where we do residencies, we do intensive immersive rehabilitation experiences for those with brain injury, learning and behavioral issues, cognitive impairment, and also peak performance. People just looking to, sharpen the knife, so to speak, and do better in their older ages. So, we see people multiple hours per day for 2-3 weeks at a time, get them on their way with home care recommendations. But our focus is multifaceted, multi-tiered, physical, neurological, cognitive, metabolic rehabilitation. We get a lot into activities of daily living. How are people sleeping, thinking, eating, moving, all of the things that keep us happy and healthy. So, we address many different avenues related to brain health. So that's kind of the nutshell there. We have lots of different diagnostic and treatment modalities at our disposal. We do like to collect data. We are a clinical facility, not a research facility, but we have been published on some of the work that we do in the area of cognitive impairment in particular, and some in concussion. I have written to that end as well, the cross between concussion and addiction. That's
Mhm.
a kind of a niche for us that we see, people that are, either heavily medicated leading to addictions or develop problems with brain injury that cause substance use, alcohol use, and other things. So there's a lot of crossover work we do, but it's still quite narrowly focused. And that's the professional end of things. As far as personal, happily married with two beautiful girls. We just talked about, ages of kids. Ours are 14 and
Mhm.
18. So moving on in life, and just loving life here in the mountains of Asheville, North Carolina, and have dedicated my life to service. So sit on a number of boards, and a longtime Rotarian. Rotary International is near and dear to my heart. So been at that for over 20 years as well, and just try to give more than I get.
Wow, that's amazing, and thank you so much. I'm going to take that apart if you don't mind, because you're saying it very quickly, and as you say, a lifetime of service, which shows. One of the first things, because I explored a little bit and immersed myself in the world of your clinic and kind of how you operate. I saw a video of someone who needed to rehabilitate from a very traumatic, profound injury. He was neurologically affected by that, and then he kind of was set up with you to kind of better understand how he was going to get out of it, if that makes sense. Am I correct to assume that those are the majority of the patients that you work with, people who have undergone something traumatic, and then you are you then trying to figure out how you can help them get back on track?
Absolutely. Yeah. The
Yeah.
vast majority of people that we see have had some profound physical and other types of traumas. The stories we hear on a daily basis just make you appreciate every moment you breathe air, simply because what people have been through and what the human condition can tolerate never ceases to amaze me. But yes, traumatic brain injury and acquired brain injury. So that could be a heart attack leading to lack of oxygen to the brain, or a motor vehicle accident where somebody has a pretty bad open or closed head injury. So yes, they're coming from pretty dark places with what they've been through, and our goal is to identify where they're at. Most people we're seeing are in the chronic phases of care, so they've been through the hospital and then the step down rehabilitation, and then they're often left to their own devices, being told that you're as good as you're going to get. You have to learn how to live with it. Now, frankly, most of the people we see are never going to be the way they were, but there's always a higher level of humanism to get to, and often hope for that is stripped away from friends, family, healthcare providers. There's this thinking that once you hit 6 months or a year, whatever the number is, that you're just not going to get any better, and that's just absolute nonsense, because there is always a higher level of function, and our brain will learn and change and grow till the day we take our last breath. So we
Yeah,
try to leverage that, capitalize on the understandings of neuroplasticity, that the brain will always change for better or for worse. So
yeah.
we obviously try to steer it towards the better.
How come we live with that assumption? How come our healthcare system is based on the assumption that this is as good as it's going to get, as you say? Is that
Yeah.
that's a deeper question maybe that we cannot answer in this interview. But how come we, as you say, neuroplasticity, our brain is growing, it's ever growing, but how come we assume that it's static then at some point? If
Yeah.
especially if something horrible like this happens, I mean, people need our help, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's, it is a very lengthy discussion and a philosophical one at that. But, the fact is, healthcare, particularly in this country, it's a sick care system, not really a healthcare system. So people are, it's very acutely based. Somebody has a heart attack, somebody has a stroke. We've got to repair the damage or keep them from dying. So we're or I say we, the healthcare system is more focused on keeping people from dying versus keeping them living and living
Mhm.
well. So there's just an inherent problem with the nature of our system, but we're so far into it that it's pretty hard to dig out of it. All of the understandings we have, and the literature is very rich with the understandings that the brain will change and learn and grow, and that people can pull themselves back from things like diabetes and even dementia with certain lifestyle changes and interventions. But there's this perpetual thinking that's rooted in age old learning or teachings. So, even though we have all of this knowledge, it takes a long time to change curriculum in medical schools and other healthcare institutions. So we're learning a lot of what was perpetuated from people that learned many, many, many moons ago. So the current thinking has not shifted with the research and with what's available to us and the understandings. And that's what we do, is we follow the research in terms of what people can do to better their brain, better their existence, and move forward instead of retract and die.
One of the things I've always wondered, and you hear this sometimes, and I was just wondering if you could weigh in on this as an expert on the brain, is it true that we're only using a fraction of our brain as today's human beings, that there's still a lot to uncover when it comes to our brain power, or would you say that's a little bit of an urban myth?
Yeah, there are, some old wives' tales, as they say. The brain is like a computer. We're only using 10 or 20%. With specific regard to your question, we're using our whole brain all the time.
Mm.
Definitely we are not tapping into resources and potential anywhere near what the brain is capable of. But if you try to remember something, or if you move a part of your body, or if you're balancing your checkbook, all parts of the brain are active. Let's take the last one. If you're balancing your checkbook, you have to see what you're looking at. So the back part of your brain is active. You
Yeah,
have to think about what's happening. The front part of your brain is active. You feel your hand on the pen when you're writing, hopefully, if you're using a pen. So that's more the parietal lobes. You have to remember things. That's your temporal lobes. You might have shock and certain responses when you see how much money's in your bank account, for better or for worse. And that's much more deeper brain structures, limbic system. So
yeah,
your whole brain is involved in everything you do. There's not much credence to that type of
okay,
analogy, but
yeah.
we certainly we don't tap nearly into our potential as much as we possibly could.
How would you think that we could tap further into that potential? Because it sounds like, as you say, it's all connected.
Yeah.
So as you say, like, changes in our diet might make the potential greater, or more movement, less movement, I don't know. Is it something like that? Would you say that would
Yeah.
give more potential to our brain, or is it something completely different?
I believe personally, and there's quite a bit of research and writing that speaks to this. But yes, certainly cleaning up your diet, moving helps your brain. All of the things that we do. Sleep. If you don't sleep, your brain cannot be accessed appropriately or perform effectively and efficiently. But I believe the biggest problem we have right now is quieting the mind. If we can quiet the mind more, we can be more productive. It's been postulated that we're never going to have the next, Da Vinci or Einstein or Edison Curie or any of these folks that did the things they did because they did them because they had a lot of free time. They had a lot of boredom
Yeah.
in their lives. And
Yeah.
that's how they solved problems. Mindfulness, right? We
Yeah.
hear this term, but it doesn't really mean much to people. Mindfulness means being present moment, being bored. My
Yeah.
kids tell me they're bored, and I say, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Congratulations. Just
Yeah.
go run with it. Be bored,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
we're constantly, being, pulled towards the phone or the computer or notifications. So, there's no downtime for the brain to allow for that potential to be accessed. So the more people are able to reflect and be mindful, present moment, perfect example, you go for a walk on a trail and you hear the birds and the wind, you're being mindful. And that's
Yeah.
when people have ideas come to them when they walk on the beach or they go for a walk in the woods.
Yeah.
So I think being still, being mindful, being bored is what will allow us, or what does allow us, to tap into that massive potential.
Yeah. I hear my mom talking. Not that
Yeah.
this
No,
was
I get it.
paternal in any way, but my
Yeah.
mom always loved it indeed when we were bored. And she said
Yeah.
that's good if you're bored. So
Yeah.
go be bored. That's fine. Rather
Yeah.
than giving you stimulation after stimulation after that a dull moment, because we almost don't know how to deal with boredom. Because we
Right.
always think like, oh, we need to, it's quiet,
Boredom.
let's do
Yeah.
something, right? That's almost because
Boredom
there
now
is so
creates
much facilitated already. Yeah.
it creates anxiety for people now, and that's
Yeah.
not a good thing. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Dr. Trayford, what I think is so interesting about your story is that you do not only help other patients, but you've also lived it yourself.
Yeah.
And just before we clicked the record button, we were working on your challenges, and actually you said, well, it's actually one big challenge because I'm basically helping myself in a younger version because I've undergone many of the things that my patients have undergone. And as your first challenge, which then drips down in your second and even your third, you've been involved at a young age in a motor accident. Is that correct?
Yes, a
Yeah.
motorcycle accident
A
in
motorcycle.
1995. Yes.
Yeah. Could you tell us a little bit more about that and how that impacted you?
Sure, sure. Do you want, the accident specifically was one of those things. I was putting my bike up for the winter and just taking one last run. And I turned a corner and there was a big old Oldsmobile waiting for me, and we just hit head on. And the bike was thrown. I stayed on the front of the car, split the helmet open. So there was obviously a head injury, but there was more life-threatening injuries at that point, which was massive soft tissue damage. I had, the plastic on the front of the bike, the fairing, that all exploded as the bike was coming out from underneath me and basically severed the muscles in my leg, in my left leg. So with that, it was a matter of life and death, just getting the bleeding stopped and all of that, get to the hospital, and turmoil ensued from there. So it was a matter of just dealing with the initial injury, but then infection set in. And next thing you know, 6 weeks later, I'm still in the hospital, them trying to figure out what to do if they were going to amputate. They couldn't get infections under control. So it was really quite an ordeal. And the head injury part of it wasn't even really thought of until many years later, because that's just when I was getting into my graduate study. So I hadn't even really found the brain at that point, so to speak. But in retrospect, I know there was quite a bit of injury that occurred during that particular accident.
What I would be particularly curious about is in 1995, what the kind of assistance was you received on the level of rehabilitation. And also
Right.
now looking back with the expertise that you have, whether that was the correct way to go, whether you said, no, that was completely wrong.
So at that time I was in the hospital, it was largely damage control. So they were performing surgeries pretty much every, once or twice a week, what they call debridement and irrigation, just keeping the wound clean. So there was really no time to rehabilitate when I was in the hospital, other than just keeping me out of pain. And that's really where a lot of my problems started, was keeping me out of pain. So I generally have a very, very high tolerance for pain, but you can imagine when you have muscles severed and, wounds that they leave open on purpose so they can heal better, that there's a tremendous amount of pain that comes along with that.
Mm.
So with that, I had the PCA, patient controlled analgesic device, basically a morphine pump that every time you feel pain, you hit the button. And that unit became my best friend in that hospital,
Yeah.
fortunately and unfortunately, because we know where this story's headed right now. So every
Mm,
time I had pain, press the button. And you get used to that pretty darn quick. So it was
mm,
probably 2 or 3 weeks after that that I started to realize. I looked at a stack of cards on the table sitting next to me, and I just started going through the cards. And it was when I wasn't in a haze with the medication. And I started reading cards from all these people that I don't even remember visiting me in the hospital. And it wasn't because I was in a coma or anything like that. It's because I was so high on the medication that
yeah.
that I couldn't remember any of that. So it hit me
Mm,
right there that I needed to get off of this pump. But with that, there was still a profound amount of pain. So I requested they get that pump out of my room so I wasn't in such a fog, such a haze, and they took care of that. But also too, they had to shift to something else, so now it became, less than morphine but still highly addictive medications. So certainly was taking those to deal with all the dressing changes and the surgeries. And by the time I left that hospital, I would say, even though it was never diagnosed, I never went through treatment programs, I would say I was a full-blown opiate addict at that point,
mm,
simply because it was just reflexive. You feel something, you take it. You feel something, you take it.
yeah.
And there was a great purpose in my life, which I can get to, that really helped elevate me out of that. But that was the story I was in. It was a really dark place. I was
Yeah.
needing to get back to graduate school. I had just gone through my first semester, and you travel with a class all the way through school, through
Yeah.
graduate school, and I had already lost the class I was with. So I had tremendous motivation to get back as quick as possible, so I wasn't too far behind. So at that point, everything shifted in my brain, and I simply stopped. As much pain as I was in, I stopped taking those pills, because the purpose that I had, just burning in my heart and my brain, is really what pulled me out of those ashes. And,
Yeah.
you know, hence the crux of addiction. In many cases, there's a lot of disconnect. And, they talk about, connection being the opposite of addiction. And most people with addictive and compulsive behaviors don't have much in the way of drive or purpose. And, for many different reasons from what we see. But I was able to connect to that purpose that really elevated me out of that really dark place, and has also been the premise for some work that I'm doing now,
Yeah.
20 almost 30 years later.
Yeah. So purpose helped you overcome your addiction. I think, that's very admirable. It would of course be a little easy to say that that would work for everyone. I mean, it worked in your case. I think it's also important to say that this is pre the across the counter opioid sales with the oxytocin and kind of whatever. 1995 is not yet the era whereby it was so easy to get
Right.
such medication. Am I correct? Like the medication that was prescribed to you was
Yeah.
given to you by the hospital. So it wasn't you wouldn't be able to get it elsewhere.
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
It was the year before OxyContin came out, actually, but
Oxycontin.
it
Okay.
was the usual, hydrocodone, things like that, the Tylenol with
Okay.
codeine, and
Right.
Demerol, and some others. Really,
Yeah.
just as potent. And the morphine itself is likely what got me into the habit of wanting to quell the pain.
Okay.
The brain is designed to do two things, and that's avoid pain and seek pleasure, and
Yeah.
sometimes at all costs. Even at that time, I had a lot of friends that I had gone off to school and graduate school, and I had some friends that from high school that stayed back, and there was a really heavy opioid use at that time. It was it's been
Oh,
going
was
on
there?
for a long time, and
Yeah.
I felt myself kind of going that direction, especially being back home and being with people, and I just really needed to not go that direction. But
Yeah.
yeah, it was certainly readily available.
So, oh, so it was already readily available. Sorry, I thought it
Yeah.
was the OxyContin history is slightly younger, but it isn't. I just want to tap very quickly into the role of pain and specifically for the brain. What kind of in your quest to overcome your addiction, how did you combine that purpose with your pain? What happened there that your pain management could control your pain with that purpose, or were you healing in and of itself already, or what happened there?
Certainly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I didn't look at it as controlling the pain with purpose, but when you have things that bring you joy and things you look forward to, whether it's a good meal or travel or getting back to school with your friends, whatever it is, there's chemical processes that occur that begin to make your brain feel better.
Mm.
these natural opioids you hear about.
Yeah.
So there are neurochemical reactions that happen when one is feeling better about themselves that can help to override pain. But also, too, I had a lot of time on my hands, just being laid up for so long, that I was engaging in mindfulness practices and all, where I could really, begin to dilute the pain a bit,
Yeah.
mentally, so to speak. So, there's certain techniques and certain types of meditation that can really help you to diffuse pain, and those were things that I was starting to learn in school at the time. So I was applying that, and then the physical aspects, just beginning to exercise, once the wound was healed enough, doing things like acupuncture, massage, chiropractic care, things that could really help to just give me every chance to nip away at that pain, so it didn't consume me. And
Okay.
again, like I said, I have a fairly high tolerance for pain, so it was one of those things I just kind of dealt with it because I knew it would go away at some point.
Yeah. And now, because we've discussed two challenges, one, your motorcycle accident, and the second challenge is kind of the addiction that followed, the addiction to painkillers. Building a bridge to your patients. So do you see patients who basically suffer from the same as what you suffered from in your clinic? Do you see people who are somewhat addicted, and do you recognize that? And if so, what do you advise them?
Every single day,
Yeah.
yes. So whether it's a head trauma that we're treating, the remnants of the brain injury, or if it's something that has led to more severe complications with addictive behaviors, substance use, alcohol use, and even other behavioral ramifications, we see this every single day, unfortunately. So it's coping mechanisms. People will utilize substances and behaviors to fill certain voids, to meet certain needs within the brain and body. And, as far as what we advise, there's many different approaches. But again, this is kind of going back to what we talked about. It has to be, a neurological, physical, cognitive, metabolic approach while addressing all of the things around it, like the sleep, diet, exercise, stress management, and also too making sure these people are working with uh, quality mental health facilities and providers. The addictions world, this day and age particularly, there's a lot of predatory behaviors in the addictions arenas from a treatment perspective. So we've developed a really strong network of colleagues and friends within the mental health community that we can rely on and do the work together, because there's this connection between the neurosciences and the mental health arena that is really not that great. Two
Mm.
communities that need to be talking to one another don't. And
Yeah.
I've been trying to bridge this gap for the better part of 15, 20 years now, and think I'm doing a good job in my grassroots effort, but really want this to become global, because at the crux of any addiction, there's underlying neurological organization and development and networking issues that need to be addressed in order for people to truly break free of their demons.
Yeah.
There's tremendous things happening in counseling and certain types of proactive mental health approaches, 12 step, you name it. These things have saved lives, countless lives. But
Yeah.
particularly now, brains are changing. The brains we're working with now were not like my brain in 1995. So
Mm.
you look at a Gen X brain, my brain, versus a millennial or Gen Z brain, they're very different. And I'm not one to broad stroke cultures and age groups, but there's a difference, and these are differences that are being shown in studies, that how brains are developing with technology are very, very different and more prone to the anxieties, the addictions, the post-traumatic stress, all of the things that we're seeing skyrocketing in our society.
Are they different because they're younger, or are they different just because they are different type of human beings already?
It's the brains are developing very differently. They're
Okay.
showing what we would consider evolutionary shifts in brain function in the last, say 5 to 10 years. The likes we haven't seen in the last 250,000 years. So what
Okay.
used to take tens and thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of years to change in the brain, is happening now in much shorter periods of time. Just like the technology curves, right? These things have gone like this, not like that, as most
Mm.
other graphs of anything we ever look at over time. Population increases and financial, and all these things are usually like that. But the exponential increases in technological usage, dependence, et cetera, is what's looking at as possibly being at the root of all this. And there are studies, the ABCD study with National Institutes of Health, they're looking at things like this over the course of 18 years. And they're seeing actual change in the thickness of certain brain regions that have to do with shifting of attention and emotional regulation. These things are changing, physically changing. So that's why I say they're not just different because they're doing things differently. They're different because their brains are working very differently than ours did.
Mm.
Yeah.
And you say one crucial difference is that the changed brain that has been exposed to technology and this rapidly changing technology, they are more prone to, as you say, stress and kind of, specific conditions. They're less resilient than the older brains you work with. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we live in a very anxious society right now, and I don't
Anxious,
believe it's
anxious.
all COVID related. I believe COVID
Yeah.
accelerated a lot of this. And
Yeah.
there's brain development things we can talk about that happened with isolation and COVID that affected, a certain generation, Gen Z in particular. I've got two, and it's this constant need to be plugged in. We were talking about this before a little bit. There's no downtime. So we have
Yeah.
brains that are just running 24/7, literally, because kids are sleeping with their phones. So their brains are working 24/7. There's no downtime for that brain to unplug, reset, reflect, think through things, critically analyze. So we're just in this kind of micro soundbite culture that everything that's being fed into the brain is just all substance. There's no substance or depth to it. It's just
Yeah.
bits of information without any depth. And the way we studied and learned and did things in the past was trial and error,
Yeah.
investigation, reflection. And that really is very difficult to obtain now when somebody has the answer to everything in the world right here
Yeah.
in the palm of their hand. And obviously, you can see I could go on for hours about this. But the big thing, what that takes away is the quiet time for the mind, the boredom, the reflection, the things that allow us to self regulate and adapt. Those things are being stripped away. So now we have brains that are finding it very hard to adapt and change. And we're seeing that culturally in many ways. I think there's tremendous strengths to the newer generations that we didn't have. They're certainly a lot smarter than we are. They can figure things out a lot quicker. But I do think there are brain implications here that we're going to uncover for the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And, we're starting early and educating people on, balancing technology with life and school and work and play and all of that, because there's no disconnect between anything anymore, whether it's work,
Yeah.
technology, all of the things, we need to do better.
We need to do better in disconnecting. Yeah, I 100% agree with that. And it reminds me yesterday when I brought my 3-year-old to bed, before she fell asleep, she asked me also to remember something that I look it up on my phone. So
Right.
she thinks my phone is omniscient. Like, she's fan of little ponies. And
Yeah.
then she wanted to know the name of one of the ponies. And I was like, I didn't know, of course, the name of, the pony friends. And she said,
Right.
well, look it up on your phone tomorrow, she
Right.
told me. And so she's already kind of, with her 3-year-old, she thinks this, the phone is an oracle, right? Kind of,
Right.
whatever we need, we can ask the phone. Like,
Right.
like in the olden days, we might have used the encyclopedia. Like my
Yes.
grandmother had this big encyclopedia, and we
Yeah.
used that, but now it's the phone, right? So
There's immense power in not knowing something. I just
yeah,
listened to a podcast on this and I was just blown away. And naturally, it goes along with what we think and talk about and research and study. But there's immense power in not knowing, because that's when the brain, the imagination kicks in and your brain is trying to fill in blanks and solve problems.
yeah,
When we have that instant gratification all the time, we're bypassing all of those critical thinking processes.
yeah,
So there's immense power in not knowing, but also, too, when you think about it, when somebody's immediate reaction is, what was the name of this, or, that band, that song, that pony, whatever it is, when you immediately go to Google to search that or even ask it, you're getting that information in a microsecond. What it does too is it creates a certain chemical response. You hear about the dopamine response. So
yeah,
just like notifications on our phones,
yeah,
getting information at the touch of a button, whatever it is, getting an email, getting a text back immediately from somebody just because that's what we're supposed to do these days. Those are all
yeah,
dopamine hits. So they've looked at notifications on phones, just like likes on Facebook. What happens is we get addicted to these things, getting that
Yeah.
response because we get that little kick of dopamine, just like we would with cocaine or
Yeah.
methamphetamines or anything.
Yeah.
So nobody's going to do cocaine 1,000 times a day, but they're going to possibly up to 1,000 times a day be getting notifications,
Yeah.
especially kids,
Yeah.
text after text after text, ding, 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 ding. So
Yeah.
they're getting these dopamine hits all day that are hardwiring their brain for addiction. So
Yeah.
there's that problem now that we're dealing with as well.
Yeah. This reminds me of the book Stolen Focus by Johan Hari, and he describes, exactly this phenomenon for the next generation. So I think we're going to see kids having to go in rehab, because they just can't handle their phones. It's like he describes his godson in the book. And then the godson is, I think, a teenager and is physically not able to part with his phone. It's just
Right.
impossible.
Yeah.
And if he does, he gets aggressive or weird stuff happens. And it's just impossible to, and there's nothing happening on that phone. Another phenomenon that is among students, I myself from the Netherlands had a great university years. And I recently received the sad news that many young students in my university city, that has been so vibrant and so many activities, so many things to do, from sports to, theater to parties to whatever, that there's now a form of depression hitting these students. Mm-hmm. Partly, the pandemic has caused that, unfortunately, because during the pandemic, everyone needed to isolate. And that's very counterintuitive when you're, 17, 18, 19 years old. You don't want to isolate. You want to be with your peers. You want to go out and party and live the life. But also partly that the phone makes you very isolated. You are in the presence of other people, but you're not really immersing yourself in what you can gain from being present with each other, just because your phone is basically a blocker to it. You feel right. you still need to have your phone when you are in the company of people that you could be the life of the party with. But because you have your phone, it's kind of a blocker to it. And, it's further absorbed into isolation, maybe because of those dopamine effects. So I think it's a very profound problem we're dealing with here. And I think you're very right that maybe further down, we're going to see that kids will need to go into rehab because the phone addiction or the screen addiction or whatever it is just not a sustainable thing. It's going to impact our brain too much.
There are treatment programs already. We're seeing them right here in our town for technology addiction. It used to be for, pornography addiction, things like that. But now there's just, kind of internet use disorder, that type of thing. But, just excessive technology consumption. It's probably one of the most pressing issues of our time, but the least, because it's not outright killing people as fentanyl and things like that are. And, those make the bigger headlines. But the bigger problem affecting far more people is technology, because that's emboldening and leading towards other things because of, even too, from a neurodevelopmental perspective, when kids start using these devices too early, they're impeding certain phases of neurological differentiation and organization and development that don't allow their brain to get to that next level. So they naturally, a kid normally doesn't have the ability to inhibit impulses, which is the essence of addiction, is not being able to inhibit an impulse, particularly when it's going to do something bad for you. So if they simply haven't had those areas develop, they are prime candidates for addiction. Candidates. That's why we're seeing it younger and younger and younger.
We are proudly supported by Tony's, who have created a product that I absolutely love called Tonybox. It's an audible tool that allows the discovery of our world's most beautiful stories for children of all ages. We are the proud owner of a Tonybox, and our 3-year-old daughter listens to the Tony stories religiously, whether this is the Gruffalo, Cookie Monster, or her all-time favorite Elsa from Frozen. Loads of figurines that fit on the box and loads who are dying to tell you their story. Now, what I particularly love about the Tonybox is that there is no screen involved. So you can basically use the box at any moment of the day, just before bedtime or as we do during bath time. Now, Tony's is also making tremendous strides improving their product for teachers from all over the world so they can grow their lessons. And if you want to know more about what Tony's is doing, you can go to us.tonys.com/pages/Tonys-for-teachers. That is /pages/Tonys-for-teachers, where you can find lots more information about all the beautiful new products they are creating. From the classroom starter set to the school expansion pack to the 6-pack school bundle. Loads of fun and lots to learn with Tony's. Okay, let's move on from here because we can talk for hours about this, but I still want to know kind of about your brain centers and how you help, of course, patients overcome, the trauma they've been through. And so we started with, you work with patients who have undergone, a similar accident as you've undergone in 1995. You also see them being addicted. Then how do you help? Where does the journey start between you and the patient?
So, really the essence of our program, whether it's a brain injury or an addiction case or obsessive compulsive behavior or dementia, we look very heavily, functional neurologists in general look very heavily into this, brain body connection, embodiment. Our brains are where they're at developmentally over time because of our bodies and our ability to stand on 2 feet and do the things we do as humans that dogs and cats and even monkeys can't do. So, it's been shown that, the largest leap in brain development came when we went from, quadruped on four legs to being on 2 feet and resisting gravity on 2 feet. It's a pretty impossible task if you think about it. It takes a really good brain to stay on 2 feet. So what goes into maintaining good balance are things like our inner ear vestibular systems, our eye tracking mechanisms, our postural muscles, anti-gravity muscles. These are things that really are directly correlated to higher brain development. So when somebody doesn't have this or they lose it, that's when things go awry with the brain. So, just look at a baby or a toddler, for example. They don't have competent balance. They don't have competent motor skills. They don't really have good differentiation between left and right sides of their body, meaning not good differentiation of left and right sides of the brain. And they can't control their emotional output. They can't inhibit impulses. They can't make good decisions. They yell and scream at the drop of a hat or, laugh at the drop of a hat. So it just shows you when they start to develop and get up on those 2 feet, do things more competently from a physical standpoint, that's when they start gaining those higher human abilities, attention, focus, impulse control, self-regulation, all these critical human factors. So we look at that brain-body connection because it's so important. And with that said, the physical modalities would be treatment, balance and vestibular rehabilitation, eye movement rehabilitation, looking at the postural influences, so the chiropractic care, core exercises, etc. But dealing with complex motor skills, motor timing mechanisms, everything we do neurologically is based on timing. The beating of our heart, speech, all of these things happen because we time appropriately. So we can measure all of these different functions, balance, eye movements, timing, complex motor skills, and then we can relate them directly to cognitive capacities that we can accurately measure as well, different types of memory, different types of attention, executive function. So we tie that all together, and typically what we see is the physical goes along with the cognitive. So, the more physically impacted somebody is, the more cognitively impacted they are, and vice versa. As we begin to rehabilitate physical systems along with cognitive systems, that's where we get the exponential increases. That's where we see the largest gains. And what we do is typically structure or stack or layer therapies. So somebody could be doing a balance exercise while reciting the alphabet backwards. So they're coupling cognitive and physical tasks. And then we can supplement that with different types of, say, vibration plates or laser therapy. So now they're getting 2 and 3 different types of stimulation at one time to connect different parts of the brain with the body. If somebody has a stroke on the right side of their brain impacting the left side of their body, we can do laser on the right side of the brain while they're doing certain physical tasks with the left hand while doing a cognitive task. We just cement those changes a lot faster. And doing them literally, in some cases, hundreds and hundreds of times a day that's where, as they say, the magic happens. Nothing we do is magical, but we do use that term a lot, because if you have somebody doing something over and over and over and over again, that's where those connections are made. That's where that change can occur that people aren't seeing when they're doing things once a week or twice a week. When they're doing it, 3, 4, 5 times a day after day, 5, 10, 15 days, that's where the really cool stuff happens. I tell
Yeah.
people all the time, it's like going to soccer camp. Somebody goes to a soccer camp for 5 days. They get better in those 5 days than they did the entire
Yeah.
year prior to that camp, because it's immersive. They're
Yeah.
bringing themselves fully into that place, cutting out all distractions, mindfully focused on that task at hand. And that's where we really get the outcomes we get, and helping people get to that next level of humanism, so to speak, by that concentrated effort. And then there's a lot that lives around that: feeding the brain appropriately, fuel delivery. We look at blood sugar, thyroid function, inflammation. So if you have an inflamed brain, or a brain that's not processing sugar appropriately, then there'll be problems. You can't rehabilitate that brain too well. So we have
Yeah.
to look at those avenues. Yeah.
Nice. So it sounds like a very holistic approach. So you basically look at all angles, as you say, cognitive as well as physically. And it sounds like routine, developing new routines is a very important point here as well. And may I ask, when creating these habits that could help them develop it further, do you also teach them how to sustain beyond your therapy? Because
Yeah.
that's I think using the metaphor of the football camp was like
Right.
playing football very well at the camp is one, but then sustaining that after the immersive experience is gone. How
Yeah.
do how do you work on that?
Yeah, that's a really great point, and that's something people oftentimes ask up front: is, what do I do after, or are these changes
Yeah,
going to sustain? So, one of our biggest goals for people, and I tell people all the time, we love seeing you, but we hope to never see you again, meaning
yeah,
that we can equip them with the tools necessary to, have them carry the torch, as they say. So
yeah,
people come to us. Some people do come back because of the severity of their injuries, and they need the constant, eyes on them, and the testing, and the higher and higher levels of rehabilitation. But for most people, we're building their aftercare program as we're going through our program with them, because every day, every hour of every day, we're learning something else about their brain that tells us what it is they're going to need after the fact to sustain and actually continue their results.
yeah,
So whether it's certain pieces of home equipment, we have people in their homes getting hyperbaric oxygen chambers, and low-level lasers, and vibration plates, and different types of electrical stimulation devices, neurofeedback. There are so many things now that are accessible to patients that we can direct them on, that weren't 10 years ago. And
yeah,
COVID accelerated some of that, where we were doing so much home care at that point that we've really kind of mastered the home care approach. We always want to see people hands-on as much as we can, but we now have a lot of people around the world that we're seeing virtually, and they're still able to continue to improve. So yes, the aftercare we start thinking about from day one of their immersive care.
yeah. What are you most proud of in your decades long journey in building this? What's the number one thing that you say,
Wow.
well, yeah,
It's always the hardest. It's like trying to pick a favorite food or song, or I've always been
you
very,
got to pick one.
I gotta pick one.
No, no.
Yeah. So I think, aside from the what I'll always say, my kids is what I'm most proud of.
Of course.
From a vocational perspective, a life perspective, my life's work. I would say getting to the place, I just turned 50, where I'm comfortable accepting success, really.
Yeah,
And we've created a tremendous operation. When I say we, for the first 10 years, it was just me. And I did all the things because I was this, overwhelming perfectionist, and thought I was the only one that could do the things that I wanted to do. And then realized through lots of trial and error that I needed people around me that were smarter than I in what they do, and that were willing to learn and grow with the process, and being able to understand that, the more I help people around me, the more I was helping myself too, from a success perspective. So being able to grow something that is now sustainable, that I could essentially, walk away from, and knowing that it would still flourish and grow the way we want it to is probably the thing I'm most proud of, because it went against everything that was in my, in my
Yeah.
thinking and my brain, and how I grew up. I always thought I had to do everything myself. So, understanding, being humbled, and realizing that, being able to help people help themselves helped me. That's just goes to the bone of service that I speak of. Service is in my blood, and that's what I'm most proud of, is being able to
Mm.
help people help themselves.
Yeah. That's a beautiful thing. What I think is very interesting is this tension between being humble and almost being arrogant in wanting to do everything yourself, because you become a very big blocker, but you think you're very humble by doing it all yourself. But
Right.
actually, you're being arrogant to your own, to your own success, or not even your success, but more the success of your operation, because you want to control it all, right? So it's actually arrogant. It's not humble. It's kind of the opposite if you think it through. So it's
Absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
that's also part of accepting success, and letting that go and recognizing that, I think is also very important, that you say
Yeah.
no. And I think a big element here as well is trust in the other people that are involved,
Yeah.
other people that come along, that might not be, it might not be their brainchild, but they still have an expertise that you could very well benefit from, and they also want to care and grow this child in the way that you want to grow it, when it comes to your operation, or your project. So that's a wonderful thing to think about, and again, one that we can speak about for hours.
Right.
But accepting success, you say that that you've also jotted that down as your third challenge, and you also relate it to a book that you're currently writing. Could you tell us
Yes.
a bit more about the book? Is it about your journey thus far?
So the book is specifically about a brain-based approach to addictive and compulsive behaviors. One of the biggest challenges of our current society. It started out as an addiction book, but COVID really changed the face of it. Where we're about 75% of the way there, and it's really about this kind of overarching theme of this hyper anxious society. You're just speaking about trust. Just there's this divisiveness about us that's causing all types of problems just with culture in this country in particular. So, yes, the essence is going to be addictive and compulsive behaviors, but it's this brain-based approach. It's going to be more of a kind of a guidebook. There's just a certain subset of the population that does not seek therapy or treatment or programs. When I was going through what I went through after my motorcycle accident, I did not do treatment programs
Mm.
because I didn't want the stigma of being in a treatment program. And clearly that was a long time ago when that stigma existed, whereas people now freely enter themselves into programs. Almost, we're hearing people, 5, 10, 15 times they've been through programs by the time they're 20 years old. So
Mm.
it's very different, and there's some things to weigh out there, but it's really directed towards individuals that, while we recommend they do seek care, may not tend to seek care. They want to do it themselves. It's been clearly shown that those who abstain from substances and behaviors most successfully are generally ones that have done it themselves. And that's a
Yeah.
little known. That's a little known fact that's been written about quite a bit. Maya
Mm.
Salovitz on Broken Brain, she writes about that in her book. So helping the people that are struggling in the day to day, the functional alcoholics and the functional pot smokers, and all of the things. Clearly this is not for somebody who's actively using fentanyl or certain opioids, where they're not going to be inclined to read the book probably. So
Mm.
treatment programs as well, where they can start to use these programs. We're looking at about a 6-week program that's dealing with survival, creating new habits, integrating things from a brain perspective, brain exercises, and then the thriving component, which is really getting people to the point where they can start to write out goals and plan their life and create purpose, which will ultimately, hopefully, pull them from the forces of what's, causing them to self-medicate, whatever that might be. So that's the general premise of the book. It's a brain-based approach to addictive and compulsive behaviors, and the first part of it will be my story with my motorcycle accident, what I went through, and
Mm.
that would be great if that story was the same as everybody's, that they just have a purpose and pull out of their addiction. It's a lot harder than that, but we're going to try to deal with all those nuances in the book as best we can.
Nice. And do you have a publication date in mind or already planned? When is the book
Yeah,
coming
we're
out?
hoping we're hoping mid next year. I've just been doing
Okay.
a lot of travel, and it keeps pulling me away from that. So I'm
Yeah.
hoping by my birthday, the end of May next year.
Good. Well, we can't wait for that and cannot wait to read it. Then thank you very much. This is beautiful, and thank you so much for taking us through your three challenges. Now I would like to go to my very three last questions that I ask all my guests. One is about your morning routine. I ask all my guests. It's a personal fascination, just for me to get a sense of what does your morning look like, and are they similar, or are they very different from each other, and is there any habit you would like to share with us?
Sure. Obviously that changes, with kids and, especially kids that have
Hmm.
to be driven to school. But typically I'm up at, usually 6 a.m. That's when I get up and give or take a few minutes. But that's when my brain wakes me up, usually about 2 or 3 minutes before the alarm goes off. And, I just get up, do the typical get up, shave, shower. And then after that, I just, get into some push ups and just get the blood flowing a little bit. I do absolutely make the bed every morning. That's one of those tips I learned a long
Yeah.
time ago. There's books that have been written about that,
Mhm.
but it's almost superstitious now.
Oh
So,
God. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
I essentially try to get to the office as quick as I can. I don't dilly dally too much in the house because I like to keep work and home, fairly separated by design, so it doesn't blend too much. So then I get to the office and just go through my morning. What are we looking at for the day before our team meetings in the office? I like to just get mentally prepared for what's happening. So looking at the schedule,
yeah. Mhm.
just writing down my, two or three things I need to do for the day. I've read a lot of books in my day, and there's certain books that resonate with me, like The One Thing, and others. The Essentialism. What are the couple of things I can do today to make a bigger difference, rather than having a to
Yeah.
do list of 100 things that doesn't mean anything.
Right. That's a
It's been
great
really,
bridge, because that's going to be my next question. What would be your recommended reading for people who are out to venture on a path like yours? What would you say? Like,
yeah.
which book would you recommend them to read?
So I keep a stack of books. I'm looking at them right now in the office that we give to people. We just buy lots of books and we give them to our patients. If a patient's having a struggle with exercising and, just moving their bodies and being healthy. There's some people that just don't like exercise. As humans, we have the need to move. So it's
Yeah.
embedded in our DNA. We're
Yeah.
just we're just lazy. So there's a book called Spark by John Rady. He's a professor of psychiatry at Harvard University. I had a good chance of interviewing him on my podcast. But a great guy, but it's all about exercise and brain function. Just a
Yeah.
brilliant book to understand how moving our bodies impacts this, and how a psychiatrist from Harvard is talking to people about using exercise prescriptively versus medications,
Yeah.
or in addition to certain medications.
Yeah.
So there's that. The Biology of Desire is a great book as well, and that is really about the understanding of the learning and behavioral basis of addiction. So that
Yeah.
is a fantastic book if people really want to understand the kind of newer thinking and understandings of that.
Yeah.
There is The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. That is a quintessential read talking about primarily psychological traumas and how they impact us over
Yeah.
time. It's really amazing. And when people read this book, it's one of those books. There's so many aha moments about people have
Yeah.
about themselves, about their kids, about others, in that we need to deal with traumas psychologically just as much as we do traumas
Regardless.
physically,
Yeah.
and especially from an addictions perspective, because
Yeah.
most of the mental health world generally steers towards the psychological trauma aspects of addiction.
And
Yeah.
that brings me to my very last question. And I think you've already said it. It's like one way or the other, you already answer kind of the next question, which is now it's your podcast. And I understand you do have a podcast. Who would be your guest? So, who was maybe from the podcast you did, who was your favorite guest? Or alternatively, who is very high on your wish list as a guest you would still like to have on?
Hmm. That's interesting. My list is so deep. So my podcast has gotten a little bit dusty. It's been a while.
Okay.
It was a 365-day approach to brain health. We were doing kind
Okay.
of a tip a day. I got to about 330 days and wound up shifting it to more of an interview format. Um,
Yeah.
but I would say one of the most interesting ones was Maya Salovitz. She wrote Unbroken Brain. We had her on the podcast, and very interesting story, of beating drug addiction
Okay.
and severe drug addiction, but doing it on her own, but understanding again that learning and behavioral basis of addiction. I love how it's written, that first person writing, and from just general, uh, you know personal experience, and just letting people understand the power within themselves to get past some of the biggest hurdles, whether it's pain from my motorcycle accident or addictions that people deal with, that we have immense power that we don't give ourselves credit for.
Beautiful. Unbroken Brain. Is that the
Yes.
name of the book? Okay. Wonderful. Well, these are loads of reading recommendations that I'm definitely going to work with. And thank you so much for sharing with us your story and sharing with us the great work that you're doing with Apex Brain Centers. And if you want to know more, you can go to apexbraincenters.com, or alternatively find them on social media like Instagram. I hear you're going very well there. And you also have the personal Instagram of Dr. Trayford, which is Neuro Wellness Doc, where you can find out more about the daily life of Michael Trayford and all the things he's doing, including his morning routine, the push-ups, and and the books he's reading. It's been a great pleasure. I really loved talking to you, and would definitely like to have you on one more time in the future to talk about the book. So definitely come back once it's out, so we can take a further deep dive in it. I'd like to thank you for your lifetime of service and being out there, making sure that people have a better quality of life also after having suffered great trauma and great accidents. And we need more Dr. Trayfords in this world. Thank you so much.
Thank you kindly, Aldo, for having me on. You take care, and we'll chat soon.
If you liked this episode of the Teach Pitch podcast, then it would mean the absolute world if you could share it with your friends and or give it a short review on your preferred podcast platform. The more you share your ideas about these interviews, the more people will find out about them. So do let us know what you think. We'd be very, very grateful.
Special thanks to Philip Anderson for our beautiful theme music. This podcast was produced and edited by Natalie Piles, project coordination by Inva Saini, and production assistance by Genta Metalia.